The Philadelphia 76ers still waiting till Friday to play a game, so we are going to debrief everything Nick Nurse is looking towards in that matchup and so much more.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? You're on Locked On 76ers with myself, Kayla Santiago, joined by Keith Pompey with you each and every day. So what did Nick Nurse have to say about a ton of topics during practice? Getting Paul George involved, which is something we talked about yesterday in that big three. Kayla Martin, some shooting woes. What's the worry there? And then Jared McCain, that's scoring coming off the bench. And today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So, Keith, this is something we really touched on yesterday, that Paul George is somebody that we want to see get more involved. We know when it comes playoff time, when it comes postseason, you can't only have two guys in Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid being those guys that can get the scoring going. Paul George needs to figure out a way to get involved, and Nick Nurse able to address that a little bit. What were his takes on trying to get Paul George a little bit more in that game with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey going forward?
Well, the thing about it is Nick Nurse, basically is like, hey, we're running some actions. We're trying to get him more involved, but I do like what he does.
Mm-hmm.
I love the rebounds that he was able to get. But, right about now is one of those things where, you look at it, you can't have Paul George standing around. You just can't. They want it to be a little bit more organic, like one of those things where it just happens within the flow of the game. But it's just, Nick is basically saying, it's one of those things you just can't have this guy, standing around and this and that. And it's like, let's face it, they know moving forward, like what we talked about yesterday or 2 days ago, that moving forward, Paul George is going to have to contribute. He's going to have his hands on the ball. The crazy thing is, yes, the two-man game was great. Paul George had 12 points after averaging 25 in the previous two. So in order for them to be successful, he has to get the ball. And that's something that they made a conscious effort in working with doing, Wednesday's practice.
And I look at it too, and I say, okay, consistently throughout this season, this big three just hasn't gotten time to really be on the floor together to gain that chemistry. And that can also be a reason Paul George is just trying to figure out his place. And it's kind of crazy because I think even during the preseason, if we date back to that, both of us said, well, Paul George is a good addition, but we're going to see how he fits in, what he's able to do. Is he going to stand back? Is he going to be a little bit more aggressive? Or will it be game by game? There's still time to figure that out. So I understand where Nick Nurse is coming from in the sense of, okay, well, you look at this right now and we're still just going to see how the flow of the game works. But at the same time, for me, I think this is something that they have to pay attention to because you don't know the status of Joel Embiid at all times. Paul George, once again, has been in and out with his knee, not playing back-to-backs. So right now in this situation, you look at the depth of the Philadelphia 76ers. We talked in that last episode of players you don't want to trade away, players you don't want to give away. They're making big impacts. But if Paul George doesn't make an impact, this team may be no better than they were just a season ago, and they might get bounced in the playoff. Paul George, he's not going to be the absolute difference maker of this team, but he can make a difference down the line. And having three scorers in this league is absolutely crucial, especially coming when you get to that playoff push where the 76ers are on the outside looking in early in this season.
Yeah, the thing is, though, Paul George has to be the absolute difference maker for the Sixers to do something. Because, let's be honest. Last year's roster was a better roster than what they have right now. People may not want to admit it. I love KJ Martin. He's playing well, but he couldn't get any minutes last year in front of with Marcus Morris, senior, with Nico Batum. He just Rob Covington. He couldn't get any minutes. He couldn't get any burn. So right now he's one of the better players, right, on this team. So Paul George has to be the difference maker. He just does. Tyrese Maxey is a good player, but right now it's just one of those things where in order for them to go to the next step, Paul George is going to have to make that $212 million. He's going to have to say that, they got him for a bargain. And when you look at it, right now you can't afford to have him in the corner waiting for the ball, right? You have to get him involved for two reasons. First of all, like Paul George can come here and say whatever. He can say whatever he wants, and it sounds good. But he knows and it's not that it's an issue right now. But what happens is when you get a star player who's used to being the guy, and then all of a sudden you have him standing around watching, things could go south, right? No, even though he'll say, hey, guess what? I'm happy. I'm good. I'm good. Nah, he wants to be involved with it as well, especially knowing when Joel doesn't play, they need him to bring the ball up and be the initiator. And then he'll say, but how come, I can do the pregame or I can do like the Bobo game, so to speak, be the man. But then when the real game comes, you want me to just stand in the corner. So in order for that to happen, he has to be the guy. He does, because this roster, they're not going to be able to sustain it without him in the playoffs, without him not having a vital role. Now, again, he's a defender. He can do other things, but at the same time, with him that's going to free stuff up for Joel Embiid.
And it's interesting you bring up that point too, because we were talking last time out about trades, and well, the 76ers look to trade anybody. And we both said it's really too early to tell at this point because we haven't seen this team fully play together. And I don't think you're necessarily going to get any type of player coming in without giving up all of your depth that's really going to make a difference. Then you're kind of just trading role player for role player at that point. And then what is the point? But I go back to that because you're in a situation where you have role players around you, and Paul George can be that guy that puts this team up a level. Now, I'm not saying that the 76ers depend on Paul George the way they depend on Joel Embiid, because if Joel Embiid's out of the lineup, this team isn't going to go that far. But Paul George could elevate them past where they were a season ago and where this team really wants to be. So it's a weird situation where you look at it and you say, okay, he's probably the third option in terms of scoring, but he could also be the second option on any given night. He could also be the first option on any given night. You're always going to try to get Joel Embiid involved. You're always going to look at Tyrese Maxey. But Keith, there's going to be nights where Paul George has to be the guy. It's just the way the NBA works. Sometimes you don't have a good night, and he's going to have to step up. It brings me back to the days where Joel Embiid and Jimmy Butler played off each other a little bit, where Jimmy said, listen, Joel, just get me to the fourth quarter, and then I will take over. And Jimmy was able to do that. It's not going to be the exact same here, but you look at it in that situation where you're going to need Paul George in situations like that. And it's now time in this stretch of December that we've been harping on so much that they start to really figure out that chemistry. But at the same time, they all have to be on the floor together at the same time too.
Yeah, they do. The only thing I will say this is, like, when we look at it, right, we talk about their last three games, right? So here you go here and you say to yourself, okay, they beat Charlotte, right? Well, no, take that back. So they beat Detroit. Now we're talking about like their last four games, right? They won 4 out of 5. So they beat Detroit. Paul George comes back. That was his first game. Now, mind you, they were struggling before that, right? So he comes back. He doesn't finish with a game high. He had a poor shooting performance, but he had like eight assists, 6 rebounds or something like that. They win the game. Then he goes to Charlotte. He scores 29 points as the point forward, right? Then all of a sudden, he does not play in that game against Orlando. Maxey and them don't shoot the ball particularly well. Jared McCain became the guy. Maxey struggled. They lose. Then he comes back against Orlando. He scores 21 points. I think he has something like 9 assists, 21-9. Everybody's excited. And then next thing you know, they win the next one with Embiid and he's not around. So to me, it's just one of those things where we look at and you see the importance of him. And yes, he does do things, but you can make an argument aside from this Chicago game. And please, y'all, I'm not hating, but you can make an argument that when they turn things around, starting between that Detroit game through this last Chicago game, Paul George was the reason that they went 4-1. Right now, at least 3-1. The last one, he wasn't involved that much. But when Joel Embiid wasn't there, it was all about, in my opinion, Paul George. So you have to make sure you keep him involved just for the team. I do. I think you need to keep him involved. And what that's going to do is that's going to open up more things for Maxey and other guys.
And I look at it too, something we really looked at was how much Tyrese Maxey's game can develop when Joel Embiid is out there between the two-man game. And that's really what we're focusing on here. How do you kind of turn the two-man game into adding a third as well? Well, Paul George now has to figure out how to play with Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey working off of each other, and PG needs to do a little bit of the same. So it's going to take time. I'm not super worried about it right now. The big thing I'm worried about is the big three playing together on the floor in consecutive games. That's what I'm looking for right now. And then really being able to evaluate that and see where Paul George is going to end up being, because this is a conversation we had in the preseason where Paul George is going to, how he's going to end up, what his role will be. And we still are, because this big three just really hasn't been able to get that chemistry and play together. So takeaway, Paul George needs to make an impact, not super big every single night in terms of the scoring round, but he needs to be involved in the game plan, because that will help this team get out of the hole they dug themselves in, and going forward in the month of December, January, and looking even further down the line if the postseason hopes are up for them as well. Well, Paul George needs to be involved, but also other players that Nick Nurse is looking at include Kayla Martin and Jared McCain. We're going to break that all down in just a moment right here on Locked On 76ers. Talking about the Sixers and the NBA, there's no better thing than going to a game in person, whether it's basketball, football, baseball, or anything in between. Every time I go to a live game, this is the app I use to be able to get my tickets, to get the best deals, because, you know, we want to go to games and enjoy our time, but also on the best deals in the best way we see fit. So Game Time allows you to do that. We're going to take a look at a game that Game Time has really good deals for right now. NFL fans, the Steelers at the Ravens at M&T Bank Stadium. A super deal going on for the top 1% currently. Value, row 5, section 107, all in for $520. Now, if you don't want to spend that chunk of money, you can also get on the upper sideline, and that deal is topped as an amazing deal on Game Time at the top 5% value. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Make an account and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms will apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Make sure you download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. So last time it was KJ Martin. This time around it is Kayla Martin. Nick Nurse talking about and going over a little bit of the shooting woes here for Kayla Martin. And he's another player that we've looked at throughout this season, saying, you know, going back and forth, he's had to play different positions. He's come off the bench. He's been in the starting lineup. It's been a little bit of an up and down year for him, but he's somebody that they brought in looking to have an impact as a role player. So it seems like Nick Nurse is not too worried right now. How does he evaluate Kayla Martin at this point of the season? Because he's somebody else. We talked on Kelly Oubre and KJ Martin in the last episode. He's somebody that can also be a big role player for this team if he's able to get some consistency going down the line.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Kayla Martin, I think the one thing to point out is, and the thing about Nick Nurse, you got to be like, when you, I hate to say this, you can't go by what Nick Nurse says right about now. And the reason being is Nick Nurse is not going to throw the guy under the bus.
No.
He's not going to say, guess what, y'all? I don't think that was a good pickup. No, what he's going to say is he does a lot of good things. He does that. But at the same time, and even when Nick takes him out, there are certain times where Caleb will struggle and Nick Nurse will take him out. And you ask Nick Nurse on the record and on the podium, why did you take Caleb out? Well, you know, his back was bothering him a little bit, and we just felt like we could go with other guys. Well, sometimes you took him out because you felt like he was hurting the team. right? But he's not going to say that. So with that all being said, I'll say this. Caleb has been battling a lot of injuries since he's been here,
Hmm.
like more so than people know. At one point, he had he had a back issue that spread up to his neck. He was trying to play through it. He couldn't, and he's been playing with, like, every time you go in the locker room, he's like, after he takes a shower, he just sits there and just ices for like 30 minutes, right? His knees, his feet, everything. The thing is, though, his shooting has suffered. And I feel like a lot of it is he's playing out of position. He's doing a lot of different things. And in addition to that, it's one of those things where we talk about the injuries. So Nick Nurse was asked about that today. And this is what he said. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. He asked about it yesterday. I mentioned this few weeks ago, but he's out there playing and he's not anywhere near 100%. He's got all kind of things going on, trying to take care of some of those mostly. Listen, I'm encouraged. I think he can certainly play a lot better. He's kind of in there trying to figure out where he is, how he fits, all that kind of stuff. But I'm not worried about it at all. Now, there's some truth in there about everything we talked about, the injuries and all this stuff. But at the same time, a lot of times when Nick is taking them out is because he realizes that he can't give them what they need at this particular time, and the other guys are playing better. So when he says, I'm not worried about it, well, if you weren't 100% worried about it, he would have stayed in the game. But instead, you went with somebody else who was a little bit healthier and who can give you more at that particular time. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of truth in there, but at the same time, Nick is not going to throw this guy under the bus. Now, when we talk about Paul George, I do believe that Caleb Martin is another guy because of his versatility. That is a guy that's going to have to help them. He's going to have to play well for those guys to have success. Because let's face it, of anybody on this roster besides Reggie Jackson, right? This guy has the most recent postseason success of
Right.
anybody, and they're going to have to rely on that.
And that's really what they brought him in for, too. Looking at that, bringing Paul George in, realizing the 76ers need to get over this hump at the second round in the Joel Embiid era. And I think his injuries get overlooked just because there's been so much consistency in the injuries of Joel Embiid and Paul George, looking at how much they've been out, how it's affected the team, and everything from that standpoint. You kind of look over Kayla Martin really playing through injury and trying to battle that out, too. But I think this is something you have to look at, and there's still time throughout the season. He's also trying to find his role, and he has to understand that his role is not going to be maybe what it was before. It might be a little lesser, but when you go into the playoffs and into the postseason, it brings up a good point because Jared McCain is somebody that we said, okay, he's the fourth scoring option for the Philadelphia 76ers. We talked on KJ Martin. We talked on Gershon Yabusele. When you look at Kayla Martin right now, that experience is going to pay dividends as a role player, especially come playoff time. And that's what this team is looking for right now if Joel Embiid can stay healthy. So we talk about Paul George needing to find his way in the big three. Kayla Martin needs to also find his way a little bit more in that rotation. And I think Nick Nurse likes everything he does, but you can't leave him in there to be able to develop that for Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey if his shooting isn't where you need it to be, because then he's a minus more than a plus in that situation. So I think that's something consistently that we're going to look for, Keith, as the stretch really goes on in December, and also keeping up with his health too.
Yeah, and here's the thing, people. Never always go with the coach speak, because sometimes coaches don't want to throw people under the bus, and they'll always say, hey, we weren't concerned. We decided to go with someone else because he's nah. The dude was 0 for 7, bro. He was getting stripped. He was this and that. I'm not talking about Caleb specifically, but what I'm saying is things like that happen, and coaches come back and say, oh no, the sky wasn't falling, where everything is great. Everything.
Yeah, they're not going to talk about their players. I mean, we learned that with the whole Joel Embiid thing earlier this season where, oh, what's going on with Joel Embiid? Oh, he's fine. He's getting better. He lost weight. It's like, all right, well, something's clearly going on. And then they get fined and then they talk about the swelling. So Nick Nurse is going to point out the positive things, and the positive things do seem to be correct, but he's not going to harp on the negative things with Kayla Martin. So that's for us to look at and evaluate as well. And because that will really affect this team as they go throughout the season. They're only going to be as good as their supporting cast. It's a team effort. And yes, the big three is the crucial part of the Philadelphia 76ers, but to beat teams in the East, and we're talking come postseason as well, these are going to be guys that are going to matter, and they're going to need to play minutes that matter. KJ Martin, we touched on last time out. The biggest thing about him, no matter how many minutes he gets as of late, he's been able to make them count. Kayla Martin trying to turn around and do the same thing. Well, somebody that does make their minutes count, it's Jared McCain getting some starter minutes, getting that scoring off the bench. And that's something that Nick Nurse is definitely fond of. So we're going to break it all down and what he has to say about Jared McCain in practice as well. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get in a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Make sure you visit FanDuel.com today. You can check out the Thursday night action happening tonight as well. The Rams and 49ers right now. San Fran -2.5 favorites. If you want to lock that in, make sure you head over to FanDuel right now to be able to lock that in for the NFL Thursday night action. And of course, if you want to go to FanDuel, if you're new to FanDuel, you can bet on any sport you like. It doesn't have to be NFL. It can be NBA, NHL, MLB, everything in between. So make sure you head over to FanDuel right now. That's America's #1 sportsbook. Be sure to visit FanDuel today to place all of your sports bets. There's no better place than FanDuel to do so. Jared McCain, he has been such a pleasant surprise this year. And I go back to even saying, and this I can say is my bad, that I wanted Dalton Connect over Jared McCain when I was looking at this Philadelphia 76ers roster. I thought Dalton Connect was more of a win-now player. Well, Jared McCain has proved me and everybody that thought that wrong as well. He is also a win-now player, and he's not only showing us that, he's showing the team, he's showing the fans, and he is showing Nick Nurse. So Nurse in practice talking about Jared McCain, a little bit about his scoring. And Keith, he likes what he's bringing off the bench. In terms of how Nick Nurse is looking at this right now, he mentioned the bench. He mentioned coming off the bench, evaluating that scoring. Is that where Nick Nurse intends maybe Jared McCain to be in these next upcoming games?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, he Nick Nurse is extremely flexible when it comes down to that. And again, sometimes he'll say something and he'll switch it up. But the thing is, he looks at Jared and he looks at him as a guy who can basically be a spark off the bench. I mean, and that's something that we talked about 2 days ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he could be that spark. The thing is, though, don't be surprised if you see Gershon Yabusele start a game. And then all of a sudden in the second half, you'll see, Jared starting the second half playing and moving Kelly Oubre to the 3 and moving Paul George to the 4 or vice versa. One of those guys, and Jared will be the 2 guard. But what they look at him now, and they like the fact that he can be a scoring 2 guard off the bench. They also feel like there are times where, with his ability to make shots, that he is a good fit to play alongside the big 3 because he'll provide the spacing. And then here's the thing. They love the fact that you can swing that ball to him with like seconds left on the shot clock, and he's going to hoist it up and make a 3. He makes the right decisions, and he's not afraid to pull the trigger. So with that being said, we talked about this a couple of days ago. We said that don't be surprised if Jared McCain comes off the bench. We felt like that was the best move for him, but also receiving starter minutes. And I feel like that's what the 76ers want to do with him. They want to keep him off the bench, but they want to keep him on the bench, but they're not opposed to starting him in that lineup at the start of the second half.
And you evaluate this situation too, and you say, okay, well, Jared McCain definitely deserves starter minutes at this point of the season. He's going to run with the starters in the second half. He probably will be in the floor in situations if the game comes down to the wire just because of his pure scoring ability. But you also might see situations where, okay, if you're down to the wire in a game, if there's an offensive score, Jared McCain is on the floor with the offensive run for the Philadelphia 76ers. If you can get a pause in the action, then you sub Jared McCain out for somebody like a Gershani Abusele or a Kayla Martin or a KJ Martin just to have a little bit more size on the defensive end of things. And I think that's what we're looking at right now, the adjustment from defense to offense, the scoring ability, but also having your lineup be a little bit bigger to start. And the game plan, I think it'd be very tough for opposing teams if you have that situation with Jared McCain coming off the bench. He's somebody that has done all the right things so far. His confidence is through the roof and in the best way possible. He struggled in some games as of late, but once again, Paul George is back. The big three is coming back. He's trying to figure out what he can do. This is the player as of late that the Philadelphia 76ers have drafted besides Tyrese Maxey that you really look at and you say, this is what the 76ers have needed from a draft pick. This is what they were looking for somebody like a Markelle Fultz back in the day. Even a Ben Simmons, knowing drafting him, maybe he doesn't have the best shot, but hoping that he can open and space the floor a little bit, and that just really never developed. So the fact that Jared McCain, to me, is ahead of schedule of what I thought he would be is a really big development for this team. And as of late, exactly what they need when you talk about depth and everything in between. Because if you can get Paul George going, back to our first point, and you have Jared McCain as your fourth scorer, teams are going to have trouble and have a tough time stopping that as well.
Yeah, the one thing that I will say, the difference between Jared McCain and these other guys is two things that stand out. First of all, they came in and they had to be the guy from the beginning, right, from the gate. Mm-hmm. And secondly, they didn't have any veterans. I mean, they didn't have any real legit veterans. And I mean, I know Jared Bayless was here. There was a couple other guys here like Robert Covington. But Jared McCain is in a really good situation now. I'm gonna say this about Jared. When teams start guarding him a certain way, he struggled. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. He struggled. However, when other people came and they became the focal point, he went back to excelling. But the biggest thing that he has is like when we talk about him these other guys not being able to produce the way that he did, he has Kyle Lowry, who's like always in his ear. He has another future Hall of Famer in Paul George. He has all these guys. So when we look at him, and he talked about this earlier, that he is in a great situation. And I would have to agree. He's in a great situation. And the thing is, he's in a situation to whereas when we look at Ben Simmons, yes, he did get paid. But a lot of people aren't chopping at the bits to get him right now. Markelle Fultz, yes, he did get a second contract, but he's out of the league now. When we look at Jared McCain, if he stays on course, he's going to be a guy that's going to be in the league probably 10 plus years because of the situation he's in. And he wasn't a lottery pick. He was a number 16 pick. But I feel like, the fact that he has these guys and he's only going to get better. He's going to work on his game. He's going to do this. The deficiencies he has, as far as when people attack him and, game plan for him. I think that's only going to get better through the year. So if I'm him, those other guys had great careers early on, but he's going to make his money in the end.
It's the longevity, right? And, the average NBA career isn't necessarily 10 seasons, but when you look at the previous draft picks for the Philadelphia 76ers, you're looking at a player that can play alongside Joel Embiid, however long he has left, and alongside Tyrese Maxey as well for the future of the Philadelphia 76ers team and organization. So not only that, Jared McCain is making a campaign for Rookie of the Year. It's still extremely early. A lot can happen. And you could say at this point that he looks like one of the steals of the draft early on at this point right now of December, because I thought that maybe he would be on assignment from the Blue Coats in some situations, the NBA G League affiliate of the Philadelphia 76ers. Well, he has made his mark. He's continuing to do so. And the one thing I really like about Jared McCain, he steps up to the plate when he's needed to. He has to figure out the one thing that you alluded to, and I agree with, how to figure out how to kind of open his game up a little bit when teams really game plan well against him. But he's been able to step up to the plate. And also when he has to take a step back and the other guys are on the floor, he figures out ways to be effective. And that's not easy as a rookie. That's not an easy situation to step into. One day you're the guy and having the most points in the game, and then you're the fourth option. But Jared McCain is slowly figuring out how to do that, and it's a really good development to see. So I agree with Nick Nurse that I like him coming off the bench with some starter minutes, the things that he can offer, especially from the shooting realm. And we're going to wait and see if he continues to do that throughout his rookie season. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On 76ers. It's been a week with no games, but the games are approaching, people. The 76ers will be back in action on Friday. That's tomorrow at 7 p.m. against the Pacers at home. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.